So where am I coming from? Well, A, there's a complete absence of understanding of gardens as heritage. You find even master plans don't recognize. So the Shalimar Bagh in Delhi gets completely lost. Terraces get built over. The locations, context of gardens completely change from suburban gardens like the Qudsiya Bagh. They become gardens right in the heart of the city. The pressures from immediate surroundings, encroachments again, squatter settlements, because historic gardens are just open spaces. They are seen as just open spaces, so perhaps the most vulnerable of heritage. The boundaries completely diminish. This is this Tughlaq period garden in Delhi, but nobody even knows about it. And because the boundaries have completely disappeared and it's got subsumed within the DDA park, which is there. The transformed style and typologies. So you have a Japanese garden, a pseudo-Japanese garden on the right, bottom right, laid out in a Mughal charbagh, the Roshanara Bagh, which otherwise is a very important Mughal period garden. The planning principles get altered, like in Qudsiya Bagh, where, you just can't make out that it's a late Mughal period garden. Alien plant species and planting systems, so you have new vocabularies, the municipal park design vocabulary coming up, and the richness of experience which you see on the left in the painting, a Rajput period painting, is completely gone. The water systems, because water is the sort of the elixir of life, it's the spirit and soul of a garden. So you have these musical fountains which come up within historic gardens in place of the other water systems which would have been there. The architectural heritage, of course, crumbles because they're not recognized as entities. Incompatible land uses come in, very often clubs, because gardens are seen as recreational places, so you put a club building in the middle. That's the most logical thing to do for most people. So the Qudsiya Bagh, you actually have a Masonic, the club which is within, and you have children on the left playing in the water tank of the Roshanara Bagh. The visitor amenities, you have this toilet in Roshanara Bagh just next to the main gateway, and the architecture of it tells it all. There's a complete lack of site interpretation, while you'll have the MCD sort of putting up their signboards as to who are the thing, but you'll have nothing telling you the history of the garden. The ownerships, you have multiple ownerships. Here again in Roshanara Bagh, the ASI is protecting that red bit, and they've actually fenced off the one channel, and the rest of the garden is with the MCD, so they do their own thing. And of course, non-existent management structure system. Now, even organizations like ASI don't have the sense of historic gardens. So these 4 slides, they're all in historic sites in Aurangabad, but one is Ajanta, one is Ellora. The top right is Ellora. The right bottom is Bani Begum Bagh, which is a late Mughal period garden. So you have a Buddhist, and then the left is Ajanta, the entrance to the Ajanta God. So the 3 completely different periods, but they could be anywhere in terms of their. Similarly for Konarak in Orissa, it's that same vocabulary of canna beds and the hedges which is there. Even a World Heritage Site like Bodh Gaya, while the tree is well preserved, the fencing and the railing design and the topiary work of the planting, everything is so historic gardens are not really on the sort of the radar either of conservation authorities or general authorities. So that's where I thought I need to put my experience, having worked on few of these gardens, and try and put them within the framework of the Florence Charter on Historic Gardens. Now, we know that there are various charters of, handling all kinds of heritage. And this Florence Charter was chartered in 1982, so it's pretty much a dated document because conservation since then has moved by leaps and bounds, has progressed. Right? But I thought I would use this as a framework, so use the 25 articles, which are the 25 guidelines to conserving gardens, and within that framework put in my experience of having worked on these 10, 12 gardens, and so give a practical sort of a thing so that anybody who's reading can perhaps, because see, no project is perfect, so I've learned a lot while working on these projects, so maybe somebody else who's reading the manual can get some lessons. So it's going to be an illustrated Florence Charter using all those examples within the framework. So I'll just briefly run through this. Like the Gardens of Taj Mahal was, you know what, the the Mughal period image is there on the top left. The Britishers completely transformed it, and that is what you see it as today. So this was a research project. So here I'm using all my research methodologies which I adopted, and putting them within the various charters which are mentioned in the Florence Charter. So the emphasis being that how do you research a historic garden? And we came up, that was the concept plan which we came up. This was a collaborative project with the ASI. That is how the gardens, the planting, and the spatial experience, the visual experience would have been. Then I'm using the gardens and open spaces of Red Fort. You can see the top left. That is what the Mughal, the 1858 plan shows it as. The bottom left is what it has become today. And we tend to associate Red Fort only with the buildings, but actually Red Fort is more about open spaces than it's about buildings. It's more about the 14 gardens which were there, if you look at that image on the top left. So this was a management plan which one again made for ASI in collaboration. I was a consultant to CRCI. And so I'm putting that experience, or how do you bring back that landscape to the present day. This was a actual project. So the site on the left, Sheesh Mahal in Patiala, and the right side is how the gardens look today. And here one is bringing in that whole management aspect of that. Here one made the mistake of not having the funding in place for the management. So today if you go to the site, it's again pretty much a derelict site. So this is again the kind of spatial analysis which one does. This is the Rambagh in Amritsar. The left bottom is what it was, Charbagh, Maharaja Ranjit Singh Summer Palace, and the top left is what partly the Britishers and partly the Amritsar municipality completely changed the thing. So here a lot of lessons to be learned on how to do archaeology, how to do garden archaeology, because we did a lot of garden archaeology, you can see on the bottom left, to reveal the various layers of the garden which would have existed. Mool Sagar, yes, this is more about to do how do you bring in the economic potential of a garden to the fore. So here we propose tented, we restore the garden and propose tented accommodation around, much in the you know, how the Mughals and the Rajputs would have had tents pitched around, and that's now become a high-end hotel. But that's helping the economy of, you know, how to maintain a garden. So various gardens, garden projects gave different sort of insights into different aspects of design. And here this is the Chokhilau in the Mehrangarh Fort. Top left is what we found it in. Bottom left is what we restored it to. Again, based on extensive research on paintings, on bahis, on kinds of various records, to really find out what the planting palette would have been like. And this is what it looks like today, which has the Mehtabi Bagh area. And so this is right in the Mehrangarh Fort. Again, some gardens in Nagaur, 4 gardens which we restored before, after, you see. So I'm using, and this is the latest project which I'm working on, which is now the planting has been done. I didn't put in the most recent image, but that's the image which we are trying to bring it to. This is at Madhudaula in Agra. So we're working on it, Madhudaula Garden and Mehtab Bagh. So this is the World Monuments Fund project. And so here again, lessons of how you do research, how do you do planting, and how climate change, how the ecological implications of a site can really force you to change the historic planting species. Because the cypress which you see at the bottom left is a temperate tree, and but it's no longer, you know, easy to grow it, and so we are giving it one shot, but if we don't, we are going to have to think of a replacement. So all these issues are going to be discussed in the manual. And so I'm just going to run through that, what the manual is going to contain. It's recognizing them. So what are the various values that gardens can have? The living aspect of the gardens, because gardens really change more frequently than a building does. So how do you tackle that? So through the illustrations, through these examples, I'll be showing that. The notion of authenticity, because authenticity as defined in a building is very different from that defined in a garden. So when you're talking about spirit and feeling in a building and spirit and feeling in a garden, different connotations to it. Use and function in a garden and in a building have to be very different. The concept of layering of history, because every layer of history has to be respected. But how do you do that in a garden? Because there you have the challenge that the trees are going to, outgrow, new species come in there. And in the new species, a new design vocabulary comes in. So how do you tackle all that? Documentation research. This, I've already made a manual for INTACH. This was the last project on how do you making an inventory of historic gardens. So this manual is going to take off from here to just see. Importance of style and typology. This is where very often we make the mistake. We tend to club all Mughal gardens as one. That if I have restored a Mughal garden in a particular way in one place, I cannot use the same methodology because the style might be different. It might be a tomb garden, it might be a pleasure garden, it might be just like Charbagh. People tend to think, all Charbaghs are the same, but you could have Rajput Charbaghs, you could have Bundela period Charbaghs. So it's very important to understand this. And because these 7-8 examples that I'm going to use really pan all these styles, I'll be able to make that point a little more. Ecological context, because a garden cannot function without ecology. So what are the various aspects of ecology you looked at? Water, vegetation, landform, geology. Understanding uses, what kind of uses go in, the thresholds of usage. And lastly, the rationale for conservation of historic gardens. This is a new thing which I'm going to put in, that, because still heritage does not make sense to the common man, to people. There's no way you are going to be able to conserve it. So so each one of these projects, how did we actually connect them with the people? That's going to be in this section. The Florence Charter doesn't talk about this. So, and there are many other, like I said, about 25 articles, which I've just spoken about 10, given the time that I have. So just to say that the methodology you have to have, a historic conservation architect historic landscape conservation architect has to have a multi-dimensional, personality or a perspective. There's history, you have to have a sense of garden archaeology, you have to have a sense of design and planning theory, the cultural perspective as to what are the meanings and symbolisms, the ecological perspective, and the ideological perspective of establishing a very meaningful relationship with nature, because that's what historic gardens give you an opportunity to do. So I'll end there. Well, these are the main projects I'll be referring to, which I've actually worked on. But otherwise, I will also be referring to about 50 other gardens, so in all about 57, just to illustrate the points that I am making. So it's going to be an illustrative thing of the various guidelines which are identified in the Florence Charter on how to conserve. Thank you.